my name is michaelnotinger, and I'll be doing this course on Akasha and the Hermetic Principles. Before we get started here, I encourage you to question and research all of the information that I convey, because you are the ultimate authority on your own personal truth. I can't tell you exactly what is real for you. You can only know that by quieting your conscious mind and accessing the universal source within. And my primary intent with this class and all my other classes is to save you thousands upon thousands of hours of research and meditations, and you don't have to sift through all the garbage on the internet or sift through all the garbage inside to find the lotus within and the lotus without. And so this class and all my other classes is a tremendous amount of effort, time, and energy on my part to save you that, so you don't have to delve through the ridiculousness on the internet, the ridiculousness within. So metaphysics is essentially ancient knowledge about consciousness and the universe, and how you can apply that knowledge to change pretty much any aspect of your life. It includes principles like universal oneness, thought creates reality, energy, modalities, and others, and it's heavily science-based, but it includes all subject knowledge to a certain extent, with the greatest emphasis on science, philosophy, and spirituality, and how you can apply those principles and practices to your own personal subjective reality. And so there are basically two types of knowledge in the world today. They are exoteric and esoteric. Exoteric knowledge is, for the most part, easily understood and readily available to the masses. It's taken shape as popular religions, mainstream science, and other widely known institutions. And unfortunately, about half of it is completely false and useless information. And then esoteric knowledge is much more difficult to comprehend, is not as available to the public or easily understood by the public. In the past, its incarnation has been almost exclusively locked away in rare books or secret societies or mystery schools, which if you told anyone outside the society, that information would actually be killed in one of the most painful ways possible. And now it's becoming much more accessible through the internet, an ever-growing quantity of books, and also within us and in the fabric of space-time itself, due to the increasing vibrational frequency of consciousness in the universe, which we'll talk more about later in this class. But there is an aspect of all popular spiritual and philosophical traditions called enlightenment, or self-realization or self-actualization. There is a level of mental awareness that you can reach once you grasp certain principles of how this reality works, what you are and what the universe is and how it operates. And so the greatest question that you can ask yourself is, who am I? And if you really meditate on that question for a long period of time, you realize there's no specific answer to it. And the maxim, know thyself, has adorned the halls of mystery schools and secret societies for thousands upon thousands of years, also in the popular film The Matrix, when Neo meets the Oracle. And I intend to be an oracle for you in this particular class here. So how is it that we can create things? We can create sounds, emotions, thoughts, and life. We basically can create biological life forms out of nothing. You know, scientists say we create human beings through the combination of sperm and eggs, but those sperm and eggs are basically single-celled, simplistic, unicellular organisms who aren't much more intelligent than rocks from the looks of it, and yet they can create an enormous human being out of just those small substances through the process known as morphogenesis. So in morphogenesis, we start out as a single cell, smaller than a period at the end of a sentence, called a zygote in the womb within the body of our mother, and then we create trillions upon trillions of cells out of nothing through morphogenesis, and then shape those cells into an entire biological organism through some mysterious process that we don't totally understand yet. So the famed physicist Max Planck said, "I regard matter as derivative of consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything we talk about, everything we regard as existing, postulates consciousness." And so what he's saying here is that it's impossible for you to get behind your own mental awareness. It is the foundation of everything that you experience, and everything is made of the same physical and non-physical substances. The physical substance is atomic matter, which is physical structures we can easily perceive with our physical senses of sight, sound, taste, and touch. And then the non-physical substance is pure, undifferentiated, immaterial consciousness, or electromagnetic energy and information. So as we traverse the Earth rotates around the Sun. As the Earth rotates around the Sun rotates around the center of the galaxy. As the Sun rotates around the center of the galaxy rotates around the center of the universe. The universe moves through Source, and Source journeys through itself. So in the Big Bang, The source focused upon an exact point within the limitless domain of its own being. And then the universe spiraled out of that singularity, which is billions of times smaller than the head of a pin, into a primal version of its present form. And now it's expanding at an accelerating rate, which causes all universal processes to accelerate as well, including time, human evolution, human technological advancement, which is why everything on our planet is changing so incredibly fast right now, both in beneficial and detrimental ways, operating on both polarities. So the famed comedian Bill Hicks said, "Today a young man on acid realized that all matter is merely energy condensed to a slow vibration, that we are all one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively. There is no such thing as death. Life is only a dream and we're the imagination of ourselves. Here's Tom with the weather." So God, source, spirit, consciousness, the soul, the universe, and awareness are all actually the same thing. You are everyone and everything. In lucid dreaming, you come and realize that all objects and beings in your dream are extensions of yourself. They are mental projections of your consciousness, and thus you can exert conscious influence over them to a certain degree. And this external physical world is the same way. We're all mental projections of a singular, infinite mind. And so we can change our own subjective realities and also the collective reality by altering the content of our minds, which we'll get to a bit more later on. And that seems quite obvious when you think about it, that everything is you, and you are everything, and that you cannot exist or survive without your parents or their ancestors and their ancestors before them, or other people on the planet, or the plants, the animals, the water, or the air, or the sun. So we're incredibly connected to things that seem to be outside of and separate from ourselves. And adopting this perspective dramatically increases your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual capabilities, because when you operate from a perspective of fear-based separation consciousness, you restrict your access between yourself and what's called the field of pure potentiality, or the quantum field, or the electromagnetic energy field that connects everything in existence. And when you spiritually awaken, you realize that everything is you, and you adopt the respective unity consciousness, you dramatically expand your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual capabilities, because you now have access to infinite electromagnetic energy and information, whereas before you only had finite access to that because you believe that you're finite, because your beliefs create your own subjective reality much more than anything else. So in this sense, everything is alive. Even though it appears to be dead inorganic matter, that's actually animated by the same force as everything else in existence. It's just there are different states or stages of manifestation and different levels of vibrational frequency, different amounts of life force are projected in different physical objects. We'll get more about the levels of consciousness later on during this particular course. Okay. So Indra's net of jewels is a Buddhist concept that describes the way the fabric of the universe is woven together with everything else. Indra was proclaimed to be the king of the gods who gave birth to the sun, the waters, the earth, the solar system, the galaxy, and everything within it. And so you can conceptualize of Indra's net of jewels as a spider web that permeates through all dimensions. The web is made of dewdrops, and each drop contains a reflection of all the other droplets. The entire web exists in that singular reflection, and so on to infinity. You could also conceptualize of it as a holographic universe, in which the smallest stream of light, or a quantum of light, or a photon, contains the exact same patterns within it as the largest galactic systems in space, because it's actually made of the same exact immaterial substance, and also somewhat of the same material substances. So let's talk about dark energy. There are basically three types of phenomena in the universe. They are atomic matter, dark matter, and dark energy. So atomic matter is physical structures that we can easily perceive with our physical senses. It makes up about 4% of the known universe. And that's not too mysterious to us. It's basically what we perceive with our physical senses. However, that's the smallest portion of the universe. The universe is much more non-physical than it is physical, and atoms are closed in almost entirely empty space. And dark matter is an unidentified type of matter that's separate from atomic matter, dark energy, neutrinos. It makes up 23% of the known universe. And we don't actually know too much about how that operates quite yet, because we don't have the technology to do it, but I'm sure we will in the near future. And the largest portion of the universe is something called dark energy, which makes up 73% of the known universe. It can also be conceptualized as a giant nervous system that connects everything in existence. We can conceptualize of ourselves as cells or neurons within the body or mind of the universe as a giant electromagnetic field of information and energy. And this is actually a picture of dark energy here, taken from the Max Planck Society in Germany that created a simulation called the Millennium Run, showing the distribution of dark energy within our local sector of the universe. And as you can see, it looks exactly like an enormous nervous system. It's part of something called sacred geometry, which is the geometry of consciousness. Some other sacred geometry patterns might be familiar with. There's something called the Fibonacci spiral, which you can see in galaxies, stars, weather systems, snails, shells, DNA, fossils, seahorses' tails, the way water drains and sinks in bathtubs, Romanesco broccoli, our DNA, and a multitude of other things. It's the perfect shape for growth and the path of progression on physical and non-physical levels for all biological life forms within the physically manifested universe. Another sacred geometry pattern you might be familiar with is something called the flower of life, which is a six-fold pattern of petals that you can see throughout nature as well, in honeycombs, in snowflakes, in the human body, and pretty much everything else. Okay, so now let's talk about fractals. So a fractal is a rough geometric pattern that can be split into parts, with each of which is approximately a reduced size copy of the whole pattern, a property that scientists call self-similarity, which has similar self-oriented aspects throughout the system that is conveyed in various parts of nature. And the term fractal was coined in 1980 by the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot, who studied certain simple mathematical equations that he found in nature that when they were repeated, they produce an infinite array of changing mathematical and also geometrical shapes which are both limited and limitless at the same time. They are inherently chaotic and full of noise and order all at the same time that contain paradoxical and complementary aspects. And if you look at ancient forms of human art and architecture, then you can see that humans have long connected the fractal pattern to the idea of divinity or the sacred or the spiritual or whatever you want to call it. So the parts contain the same aspects as the whole, and the whole contains the same aspects as the parts. And I quite like this spiral pattern here because you can see that in the Fibonacci spiral throughout nature, which I described previously. Another aspect of science that's important to understand is something called the law of conservation of energy, which states that energy can never be created, it can only be destroyed. It can never be destroyed, it can only change forms, and everything is made of electromagnetic energy and information, which means that we and everything else is eternal. We take on physical bodies temporarily, we discard those, we take on another body, discard that, and so on to know ourselves experientially. And now I'd like to move on to dimensions. So a dimension is essentially a plane of being. There is only one physical dimension that we can experience and many non-physical or ethereal dimensions. So the physical dimension we perceive outside of ourselves through our physical senses of sight, taste, touch, sound, and so on. And we perceive the non-physical dimensions through our thoughts and emotions, which are non-physical phenomena that interface with these ethereal dimensions that vibrate at higher frequencies. So outside of us, the physical dimension is the lowest frequency, densest, most dualistic and separated dimension that there is. And as you ascend the dimensional scale, things become more and more unified, more and more one, until you reach the highest dimensional level where all is literally one. And so you can access higher and higher levels of these dimensions by increasing the vibrational frequency of your consciousness through spiritual practices like yoga, meditation, fasting, taking psychedelics, interacting with your chakras, traveling to sacred sites on the planet, interacting with the ley lines of the planet, and many other things. So, Kalapas is a Buddhist term which refers to tiny particles or wavelets that rise and fall out of existence trillions upon trillions of times per second. And in modern physics, this is called quantum foam. Quantum foam is virtual particles that exist within this dimension for only a fraction of a second, which actually violates some of the laws of physics, but scientists have not changed those laws yet because they can't actually study these particles because they exist for such a short period of time. But it's just another representation of how the most ancient forms of spirituality and the most advanced forms of modern science are beginning to overlap in a variety of ways, and I'm sure they will eventually merge together to where they're indistinguishable. So, for example, in ancient Egypt, you could not differentiate between art, science, philosophy, or spirituality because they're all actually the same thing to the Egyptians, who are much more right-brained, unified consciousness than we are now. They're actually a much higher level of awareness than we are now. And then we dropped in consciousness, and now we're sort of rising in consciousness once again through the process of the yugas. And then quantum entanglement refers to when two subatomic particles are entangled in some way, they will mirror each other's behavior regardless of the distance or time separations. You could also call it quantum non-local connection. So, for example, an electron on one end of the universe starts spinning clockwise. An electron that it's linked to at the other end of the universe will instantly spin clockwise also and mirror that behavior regardless of the distance or time separation, because consciousness is the fastest force in the universe and that can transmit energy and information anywhere instantly. And so what this means on a more practical level for us is that all of the atoms and molecules of our body are entangled with everything else within the universe. So everything that you personally think, feel, say, and do influences every other being in existence because you're connected to everything and everything's connected to you. So you actually have an incredible amount of power both with your physical and non-physical processes. So it's incredibly important to be conscious of what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're saying, what you're doing, because that affects every other being in existence because it's all just you. Atoms, as I alluded to previously, are also almost entirely empty space. You're about 99.99999% repeating empty space. And you may ask yourself, how is that possible? How is it that this seemingly empty space can animate and create all these physical substances? Because it's not totally empty, it's filled with infinite electromagnetic energy and information. And it's also vibrating at such a low frequency that it seems to be physical, dense, and finite, and static. And so you can conceptualize of vibrational frequencies in terms of atomic structure through the 7 sacred elements of the universe, which are earth, water, fire, air, sound, light, and thought. So Earth at the lowest end of the scale has atoms and molecules that are very close together, so very fixed, physical, dense, static, and finite, and resistant to change. And so it's very hard to put your hand through this wooden table here, but it's much easier to put your hand through things that are more non-physical, like water and fire and things like that. And so above that is water, which has atoms and molecules that are a bit farther apart. It's more open and flexible to change, and you can easily put your hand through a stream as long as it's not been polluted by some insane corporation. And then above that is fire, which vibrates at an even higher frequency. And that is just fixed to one point on the Earth, and then it moves rapidly. And you can actually change the shape, color, and rhythm of the flow of the flame through sound vibrations, through cymatics, we'll talk more about later on. And then above fire is air, which is having atoms and molecules that are even farther apart, so far apart they actually fly all over the place and not really fixed in one location. So, air and wind rapidly fly around this planet. And then above that is sound. So sound vibrates at such a high frequency that you can't even see the atoms and molecules that compose it because they seem to have none at all. Although I'm sure that there are some kind of particles that comprise sound that we haven't found quite yet because we don't have the technology to access it. And sound is also traveling much faster than air. It travels about 600 miles per hour. Above that is light, which vibrates at an even higher frequency. And you can actually see some light particles through photons depending upon the frequency, but sometimes you can't. And we actually only see a very small spectrum of the electromagnetic spectrum of light frequencies. We only see from infrared to ultraviolet light, which means that most things that exist we actually can't see. And light travels incredibly quickly at about 186,000 miles per second. So, when you look up at the night sky and you see stars, you may actually be seeing stars that don't exist anymore because the light takes so long to travel here. The star may have already exploded into a supernova or a black hole or something like that. And then above light is the final element of thought, which vibrates at such an incredibly high frequency that scientists cannot even yet prove that thoughts even exist, even though they can prove there's something happening in the brain on electrical and chemical levels when you think thoughts, and there are certain waves produced such as gamma, delta, alpha, and beta waves. They can't yet show that you're seeing something in your mind when you think thoughts, because they don't have the technology to do that quite yet, although I'm sure we will in the near future. And thoughts are the highest vibrational physical phenomena to such a high degree that they actually create our entire reality through the Hermetic Principle of Mentalism, which I'll get to more later on. Okay, so now I would like to talk about the double slit experiment. So in the double slit experiment, many fascinating things occurred. Scientists fired photons out of a laser, and depending upon if they were observing the experiment at different points, the photons would behave like particles or like waves. And so if the scientists were directly observing the experiment, the photons, which are discrete packets of light, energy, and information, would behave like particles. They would collapse into a particle state and vibrate at a much lower frequency. When they were not observing the experiment directly, the photons would increase in frequency, become more non-physical, pure potential energy, and revert back to their wave state. And so what this means in terms of our practical lives is that whatever you focus on mentally literally becomes more real in physical terms. So it's incredibly important to be aware of what you're mentally focusing on, because that will actually become more real literally in your physical reality. And this is also related to something called the observer effect, which lists the changes that an observer will have upon a specific scientific experiment. And this is why scientists have to do all these double-blind and triple-blind studies, because they can't know too much mentally about how the experiment will turn out, because their thoughts will actually influence the outcome of the experiments through something called the placebo and nocebo effects in clinical drug trials. So in the placebo effects, you give someone a sugar pill and you tell them this pill has magical healing properties. The person actually heals their mind by believing it. And this nocebo effect is the opposite of that. You give someone a sugar pill, you tell them this pill has terrible side effects. The person makes himself sick just by believing it. And so spirit and matter are essentially the same force in different states or stages of manifestation. Spirit is the unmanifest that vibrates at a very high frequency. It exists within us as pure undifferentiated consciousness, and then atomic matter is the external physical world that vibrates at a much lower frequency. It's the physically manifested world. So the spirit is the source of all creation, the mind is the process of creation, and atomic matter, or the physical realm, is the object of creation and spirit's efforts, and your emotions are sort of your guidance system through this venture that we call the physical dimension. So reality is both emergent and symbiotic simultaneously. It contains impermanent and unified aspects. Everything is unified and also everything is impermanent, in a state of constant change. Which means that we can't really attach too much to anything in this dimension, because if we do, it's already changing into something else, and you may experience pain and suffering as a result of that. So it's best to have a detached perspective as often as you can, which is not necessarily say you become emotionally numb or become a narcissistic sociopath. It just means that you allow experiences to flow through you without attachment or judgment. So now I'd like to talk about the principle of the collective unconscious. So the archetype of the collective unconscious was created by Carl Jung, who's one of the most famous psychologists of all time, who discovered that when he was working with his patients that there were certain archetypes that were the same, that were rooted in all of his patients' subconscious minds. And he also noticed that within himself as well through introspective methods such as meditation. And he also found that he could download information from the fabric of space-time itself through meditation, a process we call channeling now in the modern world, but he just called it the collective unconscious. So we as human beings all share one great subconscious mind, and we also share our mind with the universe and the universal mind, and there's like different levels of mind throughout the universe I'll get to more later on with the principle of mentalism. So non-physical beings are real and can interact with life forms as well as atomic matter. We typically call non-physical beings ghosts, spirits, angels, apparitions, demons, and so on. And we're actually non-physical beings are temporarily within physical vessels. We're wearing costumes called physical vessels for a while, and we discard those and then revert back to the spirit world. Okay, so space and time are one and maintain relative aspects. If you go to a different place on Earth, you're now in a different time zone. If you're working a job that you can't stand, time seems to pass much more slowly. And then if you're, say, on a date with someone that you love, then the time seems to pass much quicker. And this is actually a great benefit to us, the aspect of time accelerating or slowing down, because when things are really dense and really terrible, if you're in a survival situation, then you want time to slow down quite a bit so that you can really be mentally aware of what's going on in that moment and get out of the situation as fast as you can through the fight, flight, or freeze response. And then, when things are going well, you don't have to mentally pay too close attention to what's going on. You just allow experiences to flow more easily, even though you still have to pay attention, just not quite as closely. So there's also internal time and external time. So external time is what we see on the clock, and then internal time is basically your own subjective experience of reality that you can change to a certain extent. And there's basically 3 different kinds of time. There's linear time, nonlinear time, and present moment time. So in linear time, there is a past behind us, a present in the now, and a future ahead of us. And we move through those in a straight line. In nonlinear simultaneous time, there's a past, present, and future all occurring simultaneously in this one ever-expanding now, which they've proven that simultaneous time exists to a certain extent through experiments with quantum particles, where a particle can appear to be in 2 spaces of time simultaneously, which is connected to the principle of quantum entanglement that I talked about previously. And so present moment time is basically where there is no past, there is no future, there's only the ever-expanding now. And so changing your perception of time also dramatically changes how you age and how you experience reality. So, for example, Eckhart Tolle, who's a famous spiritual teacher, only really focuses on the now, and he barely focuses on the past, the future. And he's in his 70s, and looks like he's in his 50s, basically. And he sounds also somewhat similar to a machine because he spent so much time in stillness and presence and meditation. He's kind of numbed out to his emotions to a certain extent, but his books are fantastic, and I highly recommend them. Okay, so now let's talk about the Hermetic Principles. So the Hermetic Principles were created by Hermes Trismegistus, who is reported to have been a philosopher that lived during ancient times. And then, the ancient Egyptians deified him as Thoth, the Atlantean. They showed him as a human-animal god hybrid with the head of a bird and the body of a man. He was said to have created writing and many other things for their culture. And then in ancient Greece, he was deified as Hermes with, a human or humanistic appearance, but then superhuman abilities. And he was reported to have lived 300 years in a physical body, indicating that he may not have been human at all. And then, the quality of his writings is so incredibly high and so vastly different from anything else coming out during the time period he supposedly lived, that it seems like he wasn't entirely human, or perhaps was just way far ahead on the evolutionary scale compared to the rest of his particular species at the time. So the following are the Hermetic Principles, which are taken from a book called The Kabbalian by 3 initiates. So in the past, an initiate was someone who was deemed worthy to join the ranks of a secret society. So secret societies are mystery schools of long-hoarded knowledge concerning the true nature of reality and consciousness in the universe itself. And so secret societies began as neutral organizations. We actually had an incredibly advanced global civilization about 13,000 years ago, which you can see evidence of that in the pyramids all over the world. Göbekli Tepe, Easter Island, Baalbek, and a number of other locations where there are structures that no one knows exactly how they were made. So for example, there are blocks on the pyramids in Egypt that weigh 100,000 pounds and are made of granite, which is one of the hardest stones on the planet. They stack those stones 500 feet into the air. And, archaeologists say, well, that was obviously slaves using pulleys, but we couldn't even make that today using a dozen of our largest movable cranes. And the ancient Egyptians also had various sculptures and pieces of artwork that looked like they were made with lasers or something similar to that, obviously they didn't have access to that in that time, which means they had access to some other form of technology that we're not too sure about. Although there is a book called Set Speaks, which says that the ancient Egyptians had access to a type of sound technology which creates a mass-cancelled effect on atomic matter, generating sound frequencies that vibrate above the threshold of human hearing. And so once the ancient civilization was destroyed, there were still a number of humans that were vibrating at a way higher level of consciousness than everyone else. And they realized, everyone else is going down in consciousness right now. Our civilization's been totally destroyed. We're going to have to safeguard and hoard this knowledge away from everyone else because they're becoming barbarians once again. And so it was necessary to keep this knowledge from the masses because they were at too low of a level of awareness to actually apply it without destroying themselves or the planet. However, these secret societies eventually became corrupted. They realized that, wait a minute, we have a massive knowledge and power differential over everyone else. Why don't we use this knowledge and power to create a society that benefits only really us and become the rich ruling elite? And so they became and switched from light occultists to dark occultists. So light occultist is someone who uses this kind of knowledge to help humanity evolve and move to the next level of awareness. And then a dark occultist is someone who uses this kind of knowledge to manipulate, control, and harm other people. And I consider myself to be a light occultist to a large degree. Otherwise, I wouldn't be giving this knowledge out to the world. And that's also basically the 2 primary paths that we can take in this dimension: the path of service to self or the path of service to others. So the path of service to self is the path of the dark occultists, where you're willing to do absolutely anything to attain more power and control. You operate from the solar plexus chakra. You're willing to harm yourself or other people in order to attain more power. And you basically live a highly dysfunctional and chaotic life the vast majority of the time. And then the other path is the path of service to others, where you try to help as many people as you possibly can. And you try to have a symbiotic relationship with yourself and others in nature. And the path of the dark occultist is a parasitic relationship. And once you reach 95% service to self and 5% service to others, then you can ascend to the next dimension. And once you reach 51% service to others or 49% service to self, then you can ascend to the next dimension for some reason. And so the Kabbalion is reported to have been written by William Walker Atkinson, because there are corollaries between Atkinson's work, thought vibration, the law of attraction, the thought world, and the Kabbalion itself. There are certain phrases that are quite similar in both of those books, even though no one knows for sure. And I recommend both of those books. Are excellent and fantastic. They'll tell you how to master your own consciousness and master this particular reality. So let's talk about the first of the Hermetic Principles, which is the principle of mentalism. The principle of mentalism proclaims the all is mind, the universe is mental. The universe is a mental construct held within the mind of the source, and so if you can change your mind, then you can change your life, because everything is made of mind substance. And this universe, of course, is one of many universes that exist in the multitude of existence. And so mind is a projection of spirit. Spirit projects mind out of itself in order to know itself experientially. It also creates emotions and bodies or physical structures as well. So the physical structure is vibrating. The lowest frequency above that is emotional phenomena, then mental phenomena, and then spiritual non-physical phenomena. And so expansion of consciousness is a very important concept to understand, that you can actually dramatically expand your mental capabilities, also your physical, emotional, spiritual capabilities. But the expansion of mental capabilities is probably the most important, because whatever's going on in your mind space is the primary indicator of what's going on in your entire reality, more so than anything else. There's something called the law of attraction or manifestation. Basically, whatever is within us is mirrored outside of us, kind of like a projector screen. And so if you change what's going inside, your thoughts and emotions, what's going on outside of your external physical reality, because they're actually the same thing in different states or stages of manifestation. So within us is the unmanifest that vibrates at a very high frequency, and outside of us is the manifest world that vibrates at a much lower frequency. So in more simplistic terms, negative thoughts create negative emotions, words, actions, and interactions, and then positive thoughts, the opposite polarity. Positive thoughts create positive emotions, words, actions, interactions, physical environments, and also physical realities. But then you also can't totally control it, because you're not just some lone guy